In this video, I'm going to read my resignation letter when I resigned from a position in the health authority related to peer support. And I just would like to say that the letter's pretty intense. I read it over, but it does highlight some important points. And this was sort of a buildup of frustrations regarding peer support in a mental health authority, but I don't think it's about peer support in general. I think peer support is so valuable, but the value is devalued and warped and changed from its originality when within a mental health system. And this is just my view and my opinion at the time, and I'm not saying it's how it is everywhere. And it also has a very, very sharp tone, and it's also related to how I had a very bad experience in the psych ward a year earlier. So it's sort of a culmination of all those things. And the most important thing to say before reading it is that for the 5 years before my bad experience in the psych ward, I had all amazing experiences in the mental health system, in community mental health, in the clubhouse, and in all the different programs. I really utilized everything I could to get to that point in my life where I was. And my reaction is partly that it seemed to me like that psych ward stay nearly ruined all of that. And I think also that I was supposed to go through this really bad psych ward experience to see the contrast of what really works, which is everything that I had participated with leading up to that point. And then after 5 years, building this mountain of recovery, the mountain was nearly blown up by a nuclear bomb. And that's why I feel very angry about it and also emotional about it. And not just for myself, because I got through it, but for all the people that have this happen and don't even really realize that it's not their fault. And there's so many unhelpful elements working against us when in the system. And then there's so many helpful elements, and those elements could be even more helpful if we weren't harmed in the psych ward or traumatized in the psych ward or wherever. So this is just my experience, and I'm reading it partly to have a bit of closure with it. And it's 9 more days until 1 year of talking to myself and editing the videos, and I'll probably keep going with it, but I'm hoping to say goodbye to a lot of these emotions related to the mental health system, and then maybe not go back and work in it. And also, I am feeling a bit of so-called anxiety today. It's over a week since I've been off my meds. So I want to say this now, and then hopefully that doesn't really lead to more struggle, but I could be on my way to a struggle anyway, and it could be a bit of a rough ride. So just being able to get this part included in my videos to myself could be important. And then maybe I'll be in some struggling times. And I don't want to refer to the mental health system, and I don't want to think about hospitals or all the stuff that happened before. I want to take it fresh as something new, even if it's terrifying. Take it as something completely new. Put my brain back in that perspective that it was in when this all started happening before I was labeled, and start again and see if I can move through a different trajectory. And I don't know if I'll be able to, but just reading this and a couple other things that I want to read could, or maybe could be helpful. Confessions of an Aspiring Peer Support Worker. The purpose of this is to outline several factors that I can see and have encountered from my own lived experience perspective in my attempts to be successful at giving back by working in the mental health system as a peer. I've decided to leave for many reasons. I still do not feel psychologically safe working in the mental health system. There are far too few peers, and I can't risk my own wellness. The fact that there are very few peer positions shows the lack of real support towards developing a workforce of peers. With no peers as co-workers within my reach, I feel working as a peer is not psychologically safe. I started to struggle when I submitted a complaint about how I was treated in the IPU in April of 2016. It took me many months to get the psychological distance and strength to speak up about what happened to me. I got through it for my sake, though I can't stand for this to happen to people at such frequency. I won't go into too many details, but basically I had a psychiatrist in the hospital who put me on a medication I said would not be good for me based on my past history. She refused to collaborate with me and put me on it anyway. I had to call conflict of interest in order to switch out of her care to a doctor I already had a relationship with, who promptly tapered me off the medication. I spent 33 days in the hospital and a step-down facility. This kind of power over and paternalism nearly cost me my 5 years of recovery with the help of all the great people working in community mental health. I feel it's possible people who have had bad experiences like this become the ones who are difficult to engage in the community or end their lives instead of going back for that kind of care. Thankfully, I already had a doctor at the IPU who helped me immensely by collaborating with me. I have experienced the contrast of great and harmful IPU treatment. I feel there are still many paternalistic doctors destroying people's lives while thinking they are doing their job. I now fear the IPU because of this and intend to never go back under my own power. What I'm trying to point out is that if people are traumatized in the psych ward, the community team has much more to support the person with. Why isn't the psych ward trauma informed? The initial trust is broken in the psych ward. Then extra energy is required to engage people in the community. I feel that many people are starting at a huge deficit in their recovery because of the way they are treated in the IPU. In my case, I know that what I experienced in April of 2016 was iatrogenic illness caused by the doctor in treatment. I also understand that my decline was probably interpreted as worsening of my mental illness and not as due to the effects of the medication. I was in the hospital 2 times prior for a total of 10 days each and was able to go back to work the next week. I had a doctor who gave me extra medications temporarily and then took me off of it by the time I left the IPU. From this I learned how fast I can get back on my feet. From that I knew what happened to me in April was wrong. I just had another crisis on January 23, 2017, and I managed to get myself to a mental health clubhouse. They talked to me and kept me safe and drove me to be with my family. The distress was just as bad as when I've been to the IPU previously, and I got through it without the IPU this time. I was able to avoid the possibility of getting a paternalistic doctor in the psych ward. I was too afraid to chance it as the system re-traumatized me. Hopefully through this complaint process, some changes will be made in the psych ward, including consideration of a person's RAP crisis plan. Since the system has invested so much in RAP, it doesn't make any sense that the crisis plan is not considered in the hospital. This would make things more efficient, and as one would not need to start from scratch. I already knew what would help me, and I did not need to spend 33 days in acute care. This time I spent 0 days in acute care. Why is there no continuity of RAP in the IPU and community? I share this because how many others is this happening to, and they don't even know they are being made worse by the treatment. If people get better, it's attributed to the medication or treatment, but if they get worse, it's just said to be worsening of the illness. This is wrong. What does this have to do with leaving my position? I don't agree with making people worse through treatment and then saying, "Oh, but you can recover." And if you're one of the rare few, you get a peer support worker as a consolation prize. People have to recover more from the way they are treated, both medically and emotionally. I have enough experience to know this to be true. I researched and created an advance directive and representation agreement with my wishes when I'm in crisis in order to feel safe if I ever need to go to the IPU. It also helps in that I may actually call for help knowing I will not be mistreated and made worse instead of better. Why aren't more people informed about these documents? Peer support work could be so much more helpful to people if the people weren't shot down so many levels by the care they receive. We are turned into the walking dead. It's so important how someone is received on their very first interaction with mental health in the IPU. A peer support worker would be best, or someone very trauma informed. I'm also deterred by the fact that one-on-one peer support was eliminated from the region without explanation. The 5 years of work the coordinator put into developing the program was just extinguished. This shows the devaluing of the work and disregard to the people that will miss out from benefiting from these services. My adult peer support colleagues are now wondering how they are going to support themselves, as several of them only or mainly do one-on-one work. It disregards the very people the system is here to serve, the participants as well as the people that have recovered enough to work and give back to the system. I feel that I would not want to be a coordinator for 5 years only to have all the work put in rubbed out in a day. The system does not value peer support. It really bothers me that the system would not be more supportive and collaborative with peer support workers, and these individuals are some of the system's biggest successes. The internal stigma is very sad. It seems there will be less jobs for those people who are in the process of getting trained as peer support workers. I don't understand how clinicians can support people to recover on one hand and reject the same people when they are well enough to give back as peer support workers. Another thing is that people should not be told they have a lifelong mental illness that requires medication forever. If this is really a recovery-based system, people should have hope that one day they won't need any of it. That is my hope for myself, and I won't stop until it's true. True person-centeredness would include conversations about no medication, very short-term medication, tapering strategies, and med reduction strategies. People should also be given true, informed consent that once on a medication for a certain period of time, they will have iatrogenic symptoms if they try to come off, sometimes worse than the symptoms that led them to consider the medications to help with their distress in the first place. I probably have so much lithium accumulated in my brain, it's not going to be fun to taper off. The withdrawal symptoms would be equated to worsening of illness and needing to continue the drug. It's also false that one gets worse with every episode of psychosis, as that has not been the case for me after 5 such occurrences. My brain is sharper than ever due to not believing that myth and avoiding daily antipsychotics with my conviction. And this avoidance is probably what has allowed my brain to stay sharp. And they never talk about how with each occurrence of psychosis, there's usually more and more and more medication added, and this is never factored into the worsening with each episode. I feel that the system needs to stop scaring people into submitting to its treatment and turning people into lifelong customers. The workforce is playing a huge role in limiting people's healing process with their attitudes. One day, these illnesses will be seen as temporary distress, and that will eliminate most of the stigma. I have come to understand things within myself that make the concept of recovery seem like dinosaur business. The business model is old. It's 20 years behind. In knowing that, why not speak like it might be in 20 years? The future I see is a time when 80% less people receive a diagnosis in the first place, and 80% of the ones that do are never started on meds. And of the people that are started on meds, 80% of them are off of them within 2 weeks. And the ones that aren't, 80% of them are off meds within 2 years. There would be no such thing as stigma. By the time recovery is actually implemented, it will be too late. One of the problems with the mental health system is that many people are survivors of trauma, and there's no help for that in terms of counseling and the myriad of other options. The system pays for expensive psychiatrists and medications, but not trauma support. It won't pay for peer support either. It addresses only symptoms which have compounded over time, not the causes. It numbs people out, but doesn't help people to heal. Where is the counseling, family therapy, and open dialogue, etc.? Is this a system of healing or covering up? To me, recovery is about recovering over the causes and pretending they aren't there. If you don't get a weed by the root, it just comes back. So we turn these crises into lifelong mental health problems. There is no support for trauma, and the system causes more trauma to already overburdened individuals. We need people before pills and listening before labels. The system needs to be trauma-informed now, especially in the IPU. Regarding peers working in the system, this is some of how I see it at the moment. For peers to be effective, they need to be given opportunities to say how they really see it, what they really think, and not just smile and nod when they hear words like recovery and person-centered care. We have to be able to point out what is not recovery, what is not person-centered, what is subtly coercive and traumatic, and what we see beyond the concepts created by the mental health system to appease us. Many of us still dance with over-medication and long-term medication, which should never be purported to be the solution, as there's no physical evidence of a biological brain disease or any physiological biomarker. I see beyond the horizons of what is being said today. What is being said today is already 20 years behind, as science takes at least 10 years to implement what it took 10 years to discover. It's odd how I can see this with my eyes and heart, yet we have to wait for scientists to say it's okay to treat people with dignity and respect, as the Recovery Declaration says. I can see this falling short constantly. It's sad that once the minds of professionals catch up with what's happening in the hearts of those in distress, many hearts will be already extinguished by the anguish that is asking for unconditional love and acceptance. The distress is met with judgment, labeling, and paternalism. From this state of deficit, one is then told, but you can recover. Most of the recovery needed is to heal from the way one was received from day one. Peer support works in dimensions that are immeasurable, whereas clinical work is concerned with measures and outcomes. How do you measure hope, inspiration, or when a heart is warmed? How do you measure feeling understood, validated, and like someone gets it? Peer support is not only evidence-based practice, it's lived experience approved. The mental health system is not a psychologically safe place to deliver peer support. I don't feel psychologically safe. With recent events such as the changes to one-on-one adult peer support and my realizations about acute care, I don't feel comfortable supporting people to work in an environment that is not psychologically safe or trauma-informed. I also don't feel it's safe to work in an environment where peers don't have proper opportunity to inform the system to support systemic changes for the better. The peer perspective isn't valued, and there are no real open channels of dialogue. I thought the position was a good vehicle for inspiring others to not just help their peers, but to facilitate system change. Now I feel it's just a tokenistic program with a token peer coordinator. The system needs peers just as much as peers need the system. There is little point in talking about person-centeredness and recovery when there are still paternalistic psychiatrists ruining people's hope and dignity. This creates so much strain on community mental health, yet it's seen as just the way it is. Giving someone a peer support worker somewhere down the line after they have been traumatized by paternalism is of little value. I can barely work with people one-on-one because I'm horrified by what they have been put through, and I know I'm not helping with their troubles, but problems that have been created for them. I feel most of what people have to recover from is inherited by virtue of being indoctrinated into the mental health paradigm. Because it comes from the authority of trained professionals, it's believed. I can't wait for the snail's pace of the system to implement recovery. People are dying. People die on average 25 years earlier when part of the mental health system, according to research. I want my 25 years back and to support others to do the same. The mental health system supports people to die a slow death while fearing their own brain, while lining the pharmaceutical companies and psychiatrists' pockets. Mental health first aid goes a long way to ensure people get funneled towards the labeling process. After my stay in April, I vowed I would make paternalistic treatment obsolete. I'm happy that I was able to do that for myself at least this once last week. Another point is that I couldn't be a supervisor and ask people to get flu vaccines in the winter or wear masks. I don't agree with injecting thimerosal or aluminum or glyphosate into people. I personally had to have mercury chelated out of my brain from childhood vaccines. It's hard to breathe in a mask, and it's also oppressive. If someone wants flu protection, they should get the injection themselves. I personally have not had the flu in 10 years, and I never get vaccinated. Working in this part of the community mental health system does not feel congruent for me, as it is not the part of community mental health that has nourished and supported me in these last 5 years. I owe my continuing rediscovery and recreation of myself to the clubhouse. I have equal, mutual, caring relationships with many people there, both members and workers, and you wouldn't be able to tell who is who. These have evolved over the last 5 years with most of the same people. Relationships, unconditional love, and connection heal. The people that work there don't leave and bounce around like clinicians do, just looking to better their career. It's a truly wonderful community that I will always want to be a part of. I go there because I want to, not because I have to. They have the biggest hearts, and they helped save me from being re-traumatized by the IPU in January. Words can't do justice to how much I love the place and the people. I'm so grateful. There are many great people doing great work, despite the deficits implicit in the design of the IPU. The IPU tortures people into submitting to a lifelong narrative that nobody wants. There's evidence that only short-term medications are best in the long term. Why isn't this being looked at? I listened to a presentation by 2 OTs who went to the Hearing Voices conference in Paris and gave an amazing presentation on different aspects of person-centeredness. I hope they are able to get the message out. I have a dream, or perhaps a delusion, that one day people who go through mental and emotional distress and crisis will be supported to transform, like metamorphosis, where after a rest in a dark place that is painful and disorienting, one can emerge even better than ever with new capacities, possibilities, and gifts under the unconditionally loving gaze of caring strangers. Labeling someone permanently mentally ill will be remembered as a misunderstanding of this human chrysalis phase. So I realize that sounds harsh, and I feel like 99% of people working in mental health are really good people. But it's working in a very limited framework that limits people in very huge ways. And who knows what our possibilities are as people who go through this system, because there's definitely I don't know what I'm talking about. I just wanted to read that. That was in one of my angriest moments. Hopefully, most of what I've said to myself in this dialogue has been positive and helpful, and I just, I don't know. Like I said, I've experienced hundreds of very helpful and loving and wonderful people, but I still see things that aren't helpful, and I'm more frustrated that there's not very many channels to get that kind of perspective out there as a peer. So hopefully by sharing this at some point, maybe people can hear that.